Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Joe. That's all right. No, thank you. Nothing I can do about the height I am, I'm afraid. My focus this afternoon is on children and young people. That's on 1/4 of the population of Ireland. 1,148,687 of our citizens are children and young people aged under 18. And since the year 2002, the number of children in Ireland has increased by over 13%. And I'm delighted that for the last number of years, this school here has given space for children and young people to be considered, not something that we were very used to in our society. They're not all vulnerable, but some of them are much more vulnerable than others. The history, as you will know, of Ireland's services for children has largely been written in the reports of inquiries concerned with historical abuse in institutions that were established to care and educate children, institutions where our children should have been safe. Other reports have been concerned with abuse in families, certainly where children should be loved, cherished and protected. The publication of each one of these reports, whether historical or contemporary, has brought painful truths to the fore here, knowledge and evidence that we have too often failed our children, particularly those who, due to circumstances, should have had first call on the resources of the state. The question now is, do we continue to fail, or are we as a nation going to stand by the children of the Republic? Hart reminds us of how historically children were viewed, both in Ireland and in our nearest neighbouring countries, and I quote, "For hundreds of years, children were treated primarily as property. Recently, they have been considered to be persons." And recently was in the 1990s. Historically in Ireland, we know we didn't hear the voice of children. They weren't regarded as citizens. The best that was ever said was that they were emerging citizens. And seen but not heard was the norm. And most of us here grew up under that way of thinking. Stein reminds us that children were the objects of society's good intentions, but they didn't have a voice, and they were often subject to abuse. Their perspectives were rarely recorded, and they were very seldom actively sought. An authoritarian attitude to children was dominant well into the 1970s here, and I regret that I still hear that tone coming through in some of our public discourse. There were, of course, some notable exceptions. The other way we looked at children, and I think we'd continue to do so in some of our popular press, they were viewed as troubled and troublesome, and they were seen as a threat to society. How society's attitudes, behaviours and the choices that it made contributed to that were less seldom commented upon. Today, even as I stand here and we look at the concept of childhood through the lens of the 21st century, we take a first world view. We would proclaim that ideally we view children as nurtured and protected, but we remind us that this is a minority view internationally. Throughout the world today, the majority of children contribute economically to their families and society. We wear the clothes that their hands get torn when they stitch, and that's their norm. However, we have some positive news for children in Ireland. Since I stood here last year, 4 extremely important events have either changed or have the potential to change things in a way that I believe would be very positive for children and young people in Ireland. And this gives me great hope. In autumn 2012, the Irish people voted yes and inserted a new Article 42A into the Constitution concerning children and children's rights. We await the final determination of the courts on this matter, and Geoffrey Shannon, the Special Rapporteur for Children, tells us that it's too early to state definitely what the final results for children will be, because if the referendum result stands, the government has to draw up supporting legislation. Specifically, Dr. Shannon draws attention to the need for provision to be made in law to enable the views of children who are the subject of childcare, custody, adoption or access proceedings to be heard, having regard to the age and maturity of the child. Another key change for young people who are involved in the juvenile justice system was the recent announcement that 16 and 17-year-olds would be no longer placed in St Patrick's institutions. Calls for the closure of St Patrick's have been made consistently since the report of the Committee of Inquiry into the Penal System, chaired by T.K. Whittaker. Finally, a report from the eminent judge who has just spoken, Judge Michael Riley, published earlier this month, set out in uncompromising language the total fear of a person, newly admitted, a young person, lying in a cold and dirty cell. In 6 months' time, St Patrick's will no longer have young prisoners in Ireland, and Ireland's record and human rights will be greatly enhanced, even though we know there is much more to do. We owe a debt of gratitude then, I suggest, to Judge Riley, to Emily Logan, the Children's Ombudsman, to the Irish Prison Reform Trust, delighted to see Liam Herrick, the Director, here with us, and to all the other campaigners who continue to advocate, often in the face of extreme hostility from the justice system, from elements of the justice system. I think also we have to applaud the political leadership of this present Minister for Justice, who often gets a bad press, but we need all the systems, including political leadership, to work for these decisions to get made. They just don't happen. A third significant change this last year has been the introduction of independent standards and inspections into our child welfare and protection systems. The inspections will be carried out by HICWA. And just as Judge Riley spoke about the lack of standards, it is probably quite amazing to all of you that until 2013 we didn't have standards about how our child protection and welfare services should work. The reports are published, you see them coming out now. Some areas are managing better than others, but the critical thing for me is that we now have a benchmark to work from. We will know in public where the challenges are, and we will have to have an agreed plan to remedy the shortcomings. There is therefore a transparency about how services are doing in a way that wasn't there previously. Compliance, of course, is another issue. The fourth significant change this year is the announcement that Ireland will finally have a child and family agency. I'm honoured to be proposed by Minister Francis Fitzgerald as the chairperson of the existing support agency, the Family Support Agency, and as the first chairperson of the board of the new agency. I was both honoured and glad to accept that position, because I think we all have to get our hands dirty and make this work for our children and young people. The need to have key services for children and families removed from the HSE to a position where it was the sole focus of a single dedicated agency was articulated at the 2010 MacGill Summer School. The task force appointed by the Minister, of which I was a member, was clear that this was a once-in-a-generation opportunity fundamentally to reform children's services. We are now, in 2013, on the cusp of developing just such a service. In this new agency, we will align key services into a single, cohesive, integrated and accountable delivery system. And it's a welcome development towards modernising our child welfare and protection services. Policy objectives will be set by the Minister, and the board of the agency will be responsible for its performance. Most importantly for me, each of the senior managers of the agency will have children and families as their exclusive priority. Below that management level, there is an emphasis, as I believe there should be, on strong local management, operating, though, within a clear national framework, not making it up as we went along. This new agency is going to bring together the child and family services presently in the HSE, the present Family Support Agency, which has 106 family and community resource centres, and the expertise built up in the National Education Welfare Board. In addition, the agency will also have responsibility for preschool services, for domestic, sexual and gender-based violence services, and for services related to the psychological welfare of children. Together with strategic partnerships with other key providers across the voluntary and community sector, I believe the new agency will be best placed than at any other time to offer real support to children and families in their own locality in a way that has to be open, inviting, respectful and with links to a range of other services as the needs of children and families dictate. The agency has to focus on prevention, on early intervention, and on support to families. Most importantly, it has to grow now and be based on the needs of children and families, rather than on existing professional or organisational boundaries. And we've heard, I think, over the last few days about the way professions of different sorts mind their boundaries, but it's often not to the benefits of the citizens it needs to serve. This agency will have a staff of over 4,000 and a budget of approximately 580 million. I think the board and the CEO of the agency has to make sure that we have the necessary resources to carry out the work effectively. The demand for the services of such an agency is increasing, with 40,000 referrals in last year, and we need to ensure that we have the right correct staff numbers and skills mix are available. There are over 6,421 children in the care of the state. Very recent reports of inspections make it clear that there is much work to do to ensure that children who are removed from their homes to state care are looked after by staff and foster carers who are suited to the task, who are safely recruited, who are trained and supported to carry out what is a critical role. And at this time, for the first time, we are beginning to look at what resources do we have, what staff mix do we have working with children and families, and are they adequate, and will a child in Donegal get the same service as a child in Dublin? There is still significant work to be done, and it has to happen while the everyday work goes on. I understand the demands of this task, and I pay tribute to all those involved. But I would say strongly that children, young people and families in Ireland deserve a working agency and systems that protect and support them. There is no room for complacency. Change, because that's what we're at here, is very difficult for all of us. But the prize of a system fit for purpose for our children and families is one worth changing for. It's of course not all good news. But the recent State of the Nations report in 2012, and we've heard this in many reports before, tell us that the vast majority of children in Ireland are happy within their families, with their friends and communities. More children find it easier than previously to talk to their parents if something has bothered them. And that's good news. It's also news that more children are staying on to complete the Leaving Certificate. The figures are up by 8%. And there are other positive outcomes for which we may take heart. But now I want to talk briefly about some of the children who are not doing so well. I want to refer specifically to the number of traveller children, which has increased by 30% between 2006 and 2011. There are now over 14,000 traveller children in Ireland. Their life chances, both in childhood and later in adult life, do not compare favourably with many of the other children in Ireland. In particular, I note that the suicide rates among young travellers is 3 to 7 times that of the settled community. Early death for travellers is also a strong feature of their lives. And Kathleen spoke about them earlier, so I will leave it at that. But just to say to you, this is an issue for us and one we have to pick up. The number of foreign national children increased by over 49% between 2006 and 2011. And there are now over 93,000 foreign national children in Ireland. Once again, how these children, who include many living in direct provision in Ireland, are treated now will tell a story for us in the future. Reading the 2011 Taking Racism Seriously report from the Immigrant Council and the views of immigrants to Ireland, that there was no point in telling anyone, as complaints would only be filed away. I was reminded of the many survivors of institutional abuse in Ireland who did not report their abuse for similar reason. As foreign national children here grow into adulthood, will they tell us that we've in effect silenced their voices? Education as a key to equality is the cornerstone of any decent republic. We have a situation in Ireland where over 11% of our primary school children were absent from school for more than 20 days of the school year. We only start to get interested in school absence when it hits 20 days in the school year. Over 17% of post-primary school children missed school for 20 days or more. Again, areas of disadvantage have higher numbers missing school. Missing school is really important because non-attendance at school is an early warning sign and a strong indicator that overall child well-being may be at risk. There's clearly a link between missing school and levels of disadvantage experienced as a child in later of life. We need to really think about what it is that we are doing to make sure we get in early intervention ways and make sure that children who are missing school come to our attention. Briefly, I want to say something about children who are living in poverty. It's a big area of concern of mine, as is educational disadvantage, because the effects of poverty long-term on children and young people and in families are very profound. It's not about what you have, what you don't have. It's about your ability to participate and be a member of a community. We have rising numbers of children in consistent poverty here, which means going without a warm coat or a hot meal. These children are largely in families headed by lone parents and in families where children are unemployed, where parents are unemployed. But there's a significant increase in children at risk of poverty who live in families where one or both parents are in low-paid jobs. Just to give you a quick example, in 2012, a family with 4 children living in a rural area saw their family income reduced by €1,600. This resulted from reductions in child benefit, in the back-to-school clothing and footwear allowance, and from an increase in fees for school transport. At the end of 2015, the one-parent family payment will be gone. Again, Professor Lynch referred to it, so I'm not going to talk much about it, except to say, where are the jobs for lone parents? Where are the support systems? We have no room for complacency, and if we're reforming our social welfare system, we must include in-work supports, coupled with investment in public services for children. There's other factors that impact on children. Bullying at school, smoking, alcohol misuse are of serious concern for some children to a much greater degree than for their peers. Do they have an equal place in our republic? And why has so much of the burden of the last number of years fallen on families with children? I think we need to ask ourselves. Childcare, I'm afraid, is never going to be done because new issues and challenges emerge all the time. It's important to recognise those emerging needs, and can I say that they're often recognised by agencies on the ground, such as the Vincent de Paul, Bernardo's and other agencies who are out there working with communities. Some of these issues, and they've been highlighted again by Dr. Jeffrey Shannon recently, is guardianship, children born as a result of assisted human reproduction, guardianship rights for step-parents and civil partners where that person is in loco parentis. We have now many types of diverse family life. Many of these families are doing fine, but we need to adjust our laws to ensure the family life of those children are protected rather than to continuing to ignore the new realities or look back to what we describe as a happier time. I doubt if the people raised in institutions would agree with us. Finally, I believe that as a society, we need to establish a culture of listening to children, really listening and paying attention to their voices and lived experiences, because this is perhaps where we failed most spectacular in the past. We can never, ever give up on our children because we owe them their future. Thank you very much.